Gabriel Adams, and I'm here to talk about why we need to talk about implicit bias. Every wonder why people are uncomfortable with circumstances foreign to what people are used to. That is where implicit bias comes to play. Implicit bias is the implementation of the concepts and ideals people that cause people to become programmed on a subliminal level. I warrant my credibility as a researcher with what I'm going to be disclosing with you today. I want to talk about what implicit bias is, how it leads to the demarcations within people, and how we should introduce differences to prevent issues within people. To, in other words, prevent further implicit bias, because when it comes to implicit bias, it tends to make people very uncomfortable, and sometimes people take it upon themselves to, not handle it very well. First, allow me to talk about what implicit bias is. Now, implicit bias is the subliminal mental programming of people with association of certain concepts and at times the fruition of stereotypes. Implicit bias is what you grew up to believe certain matters are to be, what you are familiar with. When people are introduced beyond the similarities, it causes them to be flustered, upset, unnerved, and unease in the general sense. Sometimes some people are either going with it or like really feel about the differences, or some people have taken upon themselves to bring harm to others. Now, going from the first point, secondly, allow me to share how implicit bias leads to demarcations within people. With non-familiar concepts being introduced to people, it induces discomfort, especially those who refuse to adapt to be malleable to the change, as I previously mentioned. From there, people begin to display acts of discrimination from those who do not fit into their mold of normalcies in varying yet similar ways. What I mean by that is like the same goal is to be achieved, but the way it's brought about tends to differ, such as segregation, ageism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and racism, and so forth. And then even from there, if certain people take it upon themselves, people begin to insult, demean, discriminate against, or even attack and or kill people, the others, because of one's, dismay, confusion, and disgust towards people and other concepts that are stark physical manifestations of one's normalcies and what is one is adjusted to living with and what one is accustomed to knowing. So whatever they're like comfortable with knowing and what they're used to, and when they have something that contradicts that tends to be a problem. And sometimes people do not handle that very well to the point they wanted to bring harm. Now finally, continuing from the first and second points, allow me to talk about how to counterbalance implicit bias and to help remove the demarcations between people. One way is to introduce variety in certain aspects of life. Well, that's the main thing about it. You have to introduce variety, otherwise implicit bias will become implemented easier. When you choose to change things up, spice things up, make some differences, that's when it becomes harder for implicit bias to take place. In reference to just the typical sense of only this way and no way else. Now, going on from that point, one way is to introduce varying aspects in certain aspects in life. There should be representation of people from different backgrounds, in reference to ethnicity, religious beliefs, sexuality, and just physical being. With that in mind, they should be able to help in order to implement diversity, change, and freedom of others to express themselves. There should also be the teaching implementation of how, as they say, different strokes move the world. If anyone gets a reference, they get the reference. But it's how when you have people who are different, how it helps the world move better and how people become more unified instead of when you have everyone on the same page, because then everyone's like uniform and it's just, like a blank slate, but it's like the same slate. Instead of having different slates, you're going to have the same one. And that usually is very problematic. Also, from there, you have how different strokes through the world and how it's necessary to bring change in order for us to progress forward and to be elevated as a people, and also to be able to evolve, whether being just from our ideas of how certain things should be to our overall ideology being changed altogether. There should be the the informing and the introduction to what implicit bias is, how it affects everyone and its effects on others, and how it is very important for people to not only not fall into it, but to forewarn others to not fall into those same mistakes as well. Otherwise, you'll have other people who are on that same track, and it causes them to become members, if not members, but victims of implicit bias. Now, as I want to come to a close and conclusion, people now know the name for why they feel the way they feel when introduced to concepts and people different from their normalcies and what they're known for. And that name is implicit bias. It is wonderful to know what implicit bias is, how it leads to demarcation with people, and how we should introduce differences to prevent issues within people. It's nice to let people know what it is that causes them to feel that way, and why it's important to not only fall for that route, fall for that trap, but to promote and support change and differences. Otherwise, you will have these issues where people are just at odds with each other for no other reason other because one is different from the other, and one's idea of what normal is different from the other's, and there's no common ground, or at least the agree to disagree of argument. Now, as I want to go on this final note, I'd like to say, in the end, there is beauty in the world with different shows helping to move the world. And if you get the references to those, thank you.